All right. Well, we were just figuring out who should introduce each other. I'm Charlie, the founder of Explore, and this is a old friend and one of the great minds of Polar Bears International, BJ. We're doing this all electronically. BJ, great to talk to you via this camera system here.
It's great to be here, Charlie, and it's fun to be connected with you. I think for the viewers out there, Polar Bears International and Explore.org have had a long relationship working together to bring these cams, to show a bit of what's happening out there in the world, out in the wild world. So, we're happy to be here, and I'm really happy to be on the line with you, Charlie. It's been a long time since we've been able to talk.
I know I kind of like a brown bear. I got into hibernation in a while, and it's interesting with technology today. I've learned how easy it is now to connect to everyone, and it's quite enjoyable. And I love learning, and it's nice. Some trivia about Polar Bears International and Explore. Believe it or not, you were our first live camp. So we're going back to the roots. So I remember that trip up to Churchill, and it was the first time we had done live cams. And so it's hard to believe we've gone full circle. Do you even remember what year that might have been, BJ? Like, how long have we been doing
I was just going to ask you. I want to say must have been 2009 or something like that, maybe.
Wow,
Is that right?
I don't know. I mean, I've lost track of time. I just, when we started chatting, I realized that really our official live cam launch was with you guys up in Churchill. So we're going full circle. So it's great to see you. For people who don't know, BJ's been around with Polar Bears International. He's truly one of the great souls and visionaries of the company. And I might have started, BJ, because I don't know if I asked you then, how did you get involved with Polar Bears International, and what is your connection to the Arctic and polar bears in general?
Yeah, that's a good question. I always had a passion for the outdoors. Was in the Scouts growing up and spent a lot of time outside. When I came to school, I picked Montana State here in Bozeman, where I still live, partially because of the wild world that's out here. It's a nice town, mountains all around, a lot of access to get out and explore. And pretty soon after I started school here, I met a photographer, a wildlife photographer, and he brought me into his shop, and I started working with him. And after, school ended, he said, there's some pretty interesting people at Polar Bears International I think you should meet. And kind of the rest is history. They sent me up to Churchill, and I started working on some cams, and here we are now.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's been many years. It's, I think for everyone, been a very strange year, 2020. And the fact that you're in Bozeman and not up in Churchill is something in itself. So I have to ask you, how has the pandemic affected polar bear research and just in general? I mean, it must be an interesting year. I mean, how is research being done, and how are people coping with the pandemic from a research perspective?
Man, that's a really good question. So Churchill, where the live cams are for polar bears, is one of the best studied polar bear populations. They've been looking at the bears there. They've been studying the bears for over 40 years now. And here's KT's bringing up a map of where Churchill is. It's in kind of the western shores of Hudson Bay there. One of the reasons why research has been going on so long there is because it's a relatively easy place to get to compared to the rest of the Arctic. And so when you have 40 years worth of ongoing research, every year people are doing the same measurements kind of on these bears. They're going out, they capture a few bears, they measure how big they are, how much they weigh, how many cubs they have, things like that. They look at all sorts of things. When you have a year, you take a year off, that puts a hole in your data set, and that does affect how well you're able to analyze what's going on up there. So I think it is pretty big. Some other places like Norway, they were able to shift when they did their research. So, the pandemic really kind of hit us hard and fast in the spring, and so the spring work was taken off the books. And then people were thinking over the summer, well, how could we still get our work done? And by fall, they were able to eke out some capture work. But I would say pretty much all of the polar bear researchers out there and other people working on all sorts of other animals, I'm guessing just about everybody's been affected by the pandemic, and probably not for the better.
Interesting. One thing I observed with the brown bears this season, and I don't know if it holds true with the polar bears, is I've been watching them obviously just through the live cams. I can't be there. I mean, do you feel that they act differently without the mass tourism? Um, or do they have less stress? I was just curious. Have you observed anything different, or they're just kind of going on their daily routines? I just didn't know if you observed anything much different.
I think it's really hard to tell because I think those that have watched the polar bear cams over the years, polar bears are pretty fun animals to watch, right? They're doing all kinds of things. Like we're doing the polar bear bingo thing right now. They have all kinds of poses they do, maybe like your family dog does at home. Like they're just goofy animals. So, are they less stressed without the tourists there? I think it's pretty hard to tell if tourism is done right. I think the big buggies, like where the cam is mounted up on the big buggies, and the people are away from the animals. That's tourism, in my opinion, kind of done right. You're just sort of an observer on the landscape. There's probably other examples around the world where maybe tourism for wildlife isn't done as well, and if you're trying to chase animals around and stuff, then yeah, that's not a good way to do things. So those animals are probably benefiting from a reduction in people going north. I would say, we had a good year this year, and I don't know why that is. I know Explore invested in some better cameras at the Cape. We put in some really nice cameras with really long lenses and better image stabilization. So are we seeing more out there because there's more bears around and less tourists, or are we seeing more because we have better cameras? I think it's hard to tell, but I would say that this year the behavior has been fantastic. We have seen some really, really good stuff.
Yeah, when I mentioned about the bear thing, I have to add that my heart really goes out to the local inhabitants of Churchill, because I know that tourism is really a big thing for them. And year round, we also, the Arctic is so amazing in this area of Churchill. For anyone who doesn't know, our beluga cam, which we also work with Polar Bears International, is up there. The polar bears, we work with this outfit, Frontiers North. Um, so my really heart goes out to them because they've really, taken it hard. And the one thing I've always commended outfitters like Frontiers North, Polar Bears International, and even at Katmai is the balance of the ecotourism, of being able to really assimilate with these incredible animals without, interfering. Sometimes I still wonder, because, or it could just be Courtney, our social media person, because she has them. I look at some of these cuts this year and I'm like, God, their personalities are going. It's funny. So to anyone out there, it is a concern of mine, because it's anyone who could ever get out to Churchill who has it. It's truly a special place. I mean, you feel like you're on the moon. The landscape is like no other. I don't know if you can elaborate on that, but it's truly one of the most magical spots out there.
It is a neat place. I agree with you, Charlie. It is. You look out onto the sea ice there, and it is look like you're looking out on the moon. It's pretty amazing. These animals are able to make a living out there. That's what's always crazy to me. I've been able to spend a little bit of time on the sea ice, a lot of time near sea ice, and I wouldn't last a day out there. And here's an animal that's figured out how to make a living out there. It's truly is amazing.
I know. I remember when I first went out there, if I can have a joke, and I don't know how these bears survive, especially with climate change. And I was like, well, why can't we just airlift a few of these seals in and just drop them in front? It's too much work. These guys, this is not fair. We got to make it easy. We got to
Right.
postmate it. These bears out there. It's funny too. You mentioned polar bear bingo. Looking at the bears this year, maybe next year we'll have to have like a polar bear yoga and breathing class. How to become cool under pressure. Literally in today's
Ooh, I
world
love it.
with polar bear zen because we all need a lesson of how to stay calm and cool under pressure these days. And they
I think we should
really,
work on it, and we've got a yoga instructor at PBI. One of our staff members, Emily Ringer, is a yoga instructor. I think we can get together on this. I like that. Staying
yeah.
cool under pressure.
And we might have to have a Zoom class with some cool teachers, literally, because I've been watching them and there's something to be said. It's one of the amazing things about nature when you observe it is there are so many lessons and the way they're able to assimilate into the climate. And, I mean, look at this bear right now. I mean, that is not adorable. It's amazing that they're so powerful because you just want to hug them. These bears, look at those claws. Jeez.
I know, right?
Let,
You kind of want to just go out there and pet it behind the ears, right?
Yeah, if that doesn't melt your heart, jeez. How is speaking of sea ice, how is the sea ice doing this year? Do we think we're going to get it frozen? I mean, what are the conditions of it? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so I was just looking at the ice maps for Churchill, and things are actually freezing up pretty well around Churchill. So that's good for the Churchill bears. I guess the bay temperature, the water temperature was a little bit cooler coming into fall. So that's good, For the rest of the Arctic, though, things aren't quite as happy. The sea ice melted considerably in the off season and now has a lot of ways to make back, and it's not growing back. It's not freezing quite as quickly as we'd like. So I think the Churchill bears, the ones we're watching on the camera, are the lucky ones in the Arctic this year, and last year too they had a pretty good year. So I think that's supported too, Charlie, by the triplet cubs that we saw earlier. You only get triplet cubs when the females are super healthy. So to see that was truly spectacular and very, very rare.
Yeah, I was going to. That is really rare. I mean, usually a polar bear mom, if you're lucky, has twins, if I'm correct. So triplets and to be healthy is an encouraging sign. I would imagine that the polar bears are, at least the ones in Churchill, are trying to make it through here.
Yeah,
it's not,
absolutely.
Some other questions about the sea ice you had said, and I think it's misleading, is so if we hear that the sea ice is freezing in Churchill, that's not necessarily true for the entire region of the Arctic sea ice. That can be misleading because there's different pockets, different climates. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, the Arctic is just such a huge place, and so what's going on one side, is could be very different than what's happening on the other side. Much like our weather here in Montana is a lot different than yours in California. So I think we're seeing some cooler temperatures there in Churchill. So like I say, the ice is starting to form along the western side up towards Rankin Inlet, which is north of Churchill, and then kind of down and around the Cape Churchill itself. So that's really good stuff here. We're kind of looking at historic sea ice maps and what happens when it freezes and thaws. And this is, an annual pattern. Every summer, the sea ice is always melted back. And then the winter, it always comes back and freezes out. But with climate change, we're seeing that the melt season is longer and it's taking away more sea ice. It's melting more sea ice. So ultimately just means that it's less time that polar bears, especially the polar bears in Churchill, get to spend on sea ice.
Is it more important the early freeze or the late thaw, or does it not matter when it comes to sea ice?
That's a really good question, and I think it probably depends on who you are as a polar bear, right? If you're a female polar bear and maybe you have some cubs with you, and you're just getting out of a den in March, you're probably wanting that sea ice to persist a little longer in the spring because you've just gone maybe up to 8 months without eating any seals, and you really want to be able to make as much. Here's a little cub just after they come out of the den. They're about 20 some pounds here. Just really fun, goofy, cute little animals here trying to figure out the world, how to be a polar bear. But if you're just coming out of a den like these ones are, you're going to want that sea ice to persist into the spring and into the summer as long as possible. I think if you're a hungry bear, if you didn't have a very good spring and you were on land all summer, you're probably going to want that sea ice to come in earlier in the fall. I think the trouble with with climate change, especially with these well-studied bears we're seeing in Churchill, they're losing it on both ends. The ice is melting earlier in the spring and it's freezing up later, so they're kind of taking it on both fronts there.
Is a you know, I, we hear about, I guess, living in California, the idea of, the sea freezing over is kind of a novel thing. I've obviously never seen it. What is the range of the sea ice? I have no idea. Like, to me, I'm just thinking about a long walk. I mean, how far, when it starts to freeze at Churchill, what do we have a sense of distance of like sea ice freeze? Because how far are they going?
Yeah, I remember listening to someone talk about they were speaking to two different classrooms. One maybe in the tropical region and one in the far north. And the kids in the far north couldn't believe that someone lives near an ocean that never freezes. I mean, not believe, but it was just hard for them to imagine maybe. And then the kids near the tropical region had a hard time thinking that their ocean could actually freeze. So I think it is kind of, being in California, to actually think that, an ocean could freeze and you could walk on it and you could walk for days or even months is pretty, it's a pretty foreign thought, And, I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to look it up to see how far across it is from, if you were to walk from Churchill over to the eastern shore. But I mean, it's got to be a couple hundred miles. I'm going to look that up actually, because I'm pretty curious. But I mean, that would just be a start. The Hudson Bay is just kind of a lobe of ocean that protrudes into interior Canada. If you were to maybe start in one of the northern communities and just start walking north and try to walk over the top and into Canada, or sorry, into Russia, I mean, that would just be, I don't know if you'd make it. I don't think you would. It would just be a long, long walk. So, I'm getting some help here. Called in a friend. Yeah, the Hudson Bay is like 650 miles wide. That's a long walk.
Oh, wow. Right. Okay.
So,
So
I mean,
and do you think that it just I don't know who's listening to this chat, and there might be a lot of newbies, so I got to set you up with some Polar Bear 101. I mean, if you could just explain again for anyone who doesn't know the importance of the sea ice to the polar bear, it's just important, and we'll just go back to the most fundamental question.
totally. And it's always good to remember that the sea ice is really kind of the entire ecosystem for polar bears, and it's not what's on top. Like Charlie and I were just saying, it looks like the moon on top. Well, it does look like the moon on top, but it's everything that's underneath that's making it tick, making it work for the polar bear. So there's little algae that live in on the underside of the sea ice, and there's little diatoms that feed on this algae, and then copepods feed on these diatoms. Arctic cod eat the copepod, and then the ring seal eat the Arctic cod. And really, this is the whole system. It's pretty short, it's pretty small, but all of it relies on that sea ice, even the ring seal. Yes, if all the Arctic sea ice were to melt, could ring seals, theoretically survive? Sure. They can poke their head up in the open ocean and take a breath, no problem. There's going to be water there, no problem. But it's in the springtime that they need the sea ice in order to have their young. They give birth to these pups in these layers of the snow that are protected from view to keep them out of the reach of polar bears. And so the Arctic cod the seals need the sea ice, and everything backwards on that Arctic food chain that you saw. So sometimes we call it an upside down garden. This is a neat shot of one of these seals sitting at a breathing hole here. But this, without the sea ice, you don't have any of this stuff. Animals would live without sea ice, sure. There'd be killer whales up there. That would be the top of the food chain instead of polar bears. But like you say, this is it. This is the whole system for polar bears, and they need that sea ice to catch those seals.
Do polar bears have almost like a GPS system? I mean, each year do the same polar bears go in a certain direction out there? How do they know where to go?
That is
I mean,
that's such a good question. If it was me out there, I'd be lost in a few minutes. There's no landmarks, there's no road signs, and sure, the sea ice actually looks pretty similar. One chunk is going to look pretty similar to the next. Um, but I don't, they don't really have a GPS unless I guess we put one on them, like a radio collar. Uh, but they are so good at finding their way. It's amazing. Imagine the sea ice you can see kind of in our background here, just floating above Charlie and I's heads. This is ice moving. The sea ice isn't static. It's constantly moving up there. And so somehow these bears are on this moving platform, swirling around in this frozen ocean, trying to find their food. And then in the springtime, where they have some place to be, if you're a female looking for a place to den, some females select almost the exact same place every year, or when they're pregnant, every 3 years, almost the exact same place to den. I mean, to be able to wander around in the Arctic for 3 years or 2 years and then find your place to den is amazing. It's totally amazing. So I'm not exactly sure what it is that allows them, to be able to navigate so well. Some people say maybe there's something to do with the stars. It's hard to say, but they are really good at finding their way in a place with very few landmarks.
And this brings up a big trivia question for me, and I'm happy I finally get asked because it's something I've wondered for years. In all the nature videos I watch where I see polar bears out on the ice, the sea ice, it's daytime. But technically they're out in winter, which means it's 24 hours dark. So aren't polar bears technically walking the sea ice and hunting at night? And if so, they must have extraordinary vision and scent to do so. I mean, isn't it these videos are all the day, but wouldn't it be night? Isn't it 24-hour night up in the Arctic? So help me out here. Like what's going on?
Yeah, depending on how high. Yeah, sorry, there's a little delay there. But yeah, depending on how far north you are on the planet, you could have very little daylight. Like Churchill right now, their shortest day towards the end of December here will be 5 hours of daylight, somewhere around there. But other places further north where polar bears live, you're right, 24 hours of darkness, complete black. The sun doesn't come up at all for months at a time. So polar bears do see a little better at night than we humans do. They're considered dichromats, so they have different ratio of rods and cones in their eyes than we do. So they are more sensitive in the dark. But really, their best sense is probably their sense of smell. They've got this really. Oh, I usually have a polar bear skull with me, but you can see here on this video, see how long their nose is there. That area is full of cells that allow them to pick up what's going on in the air. And so we like to think that polar bears live their life through their nose. That's really probably how they're doing a lot of route finding, but also how they're able to find their food. I don't know if you've probably been close to seals there in California. They have a unique odor to them. If you had a big old nose like a polar bear there, I think you'd be able to find them from a long ways away.
Yeah, that's why I just bring it up, and I just think for audience and people, because filmmakers can't get out on the sea ice, they're showing you videos of beautiful blue days, or they might get the dramatic snowstorm. But I think we take for granted when we think what hunters they are, that most of these polar bears are hunting in very dark conditions, walking on moving ice, and dependent on their nose to find these seals. It makes it even more extraordinary. So it's a great thing for anyone when they talk about it, because you're seeing shots that filmmakers can get, but they couldn't film the nighttime shots, nor could they get out there in the conditions. And that's always fascinated me. And it really makes the polar bear even more extraordinary, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's good to remember for sure, because we do see the view that maybe is most accessible for the filmmakers, but it doesn't tell the whole story, does it?
No. I was just curious. I consider myself Sesame Street for adults. And I've worked at Polar Bear International, and you have some really smart scientific guys. So there's been a problem in communication because I try to keep it really simple. They're extremely scientific. Have scientists or people ever considered giving the polar bears names. I know with the brown bears at Katmai, the ones that people remember are like Otis, and even 747 sounds like a large plane, or
747.
Holly. Yeah, I'm just curious. And I'd be curious from fans, would there be more of an emotional connection to the bear if we just gave them, look how cute they are, names? I mean, do they ever toy around with this? Why do we always have to have these scientific names? I just had to bring it up. I
That's
always
a
try to, at
that's a
least the
good
nickname.
question. Yeah, so the buggy drivers are up there, and they get a pretty close view. And if a bear has a pretty unique mark on it, like a big scar on its face, uh, then the buggy drivers usually name them. I think the challenge with the cams is the bears are kind of always sort of walking past, and so we're just seeing this like I don't know what you call it, almost like a assembly line of bears, like a kind of a long line of bears, and seeing the same one twice. It happens, every couple of days we see them, and then they just keep walking through. But we've had some pretty famous bears up there. Victor was one that the buggy drivers had named because it had a big V-shaped scar on its nose. And then there was another bear that was quite famous called Dancer. This bear was one that the drivers had known for years and years, came back almost on the same day every year. And they called it Dancer because he was a very big male. But when he stood up next to the buggy, he would push off and kind of walk backwards and on his two back legs. And people said it looked like he was dancing. So there have been a few named bears, but I think they are pretty hard to tell apart on the cams. And like I say, we just see so many of them. We almost have to like get big name tags for them. So maybe we need to work on like polar bear name tags.
I don't, I don't, I don't know. Speaking of, name tags, and again, because we have a lot of maybe newbies on this talk, it is true, if I'm correct, that the polar bear's biggest threat and why they were considered endangered is climate change. That is true, right? It's not like hunting, it's climate change, correct? So any other species
Yep,
like
that's
that?
it.
Or,
Oh man, I mean,
wow.
there's lots of species that are like that, and like I was describing, it is that sea ice, and as the sea ice melts, there's less access for food, and so that's the threat for the polar bears. But there's many species all around the world that rely on a climate that has been fairly stable for the last whatever it is, 1 million years or so here on the planet. So that's it's polar bears aren't the only ones, and humans are in this system too. We've been able to make a living on this planet. Things are quite comfortable for many of us now with all the technology that we have. You don't have to go too far back, though, in our history, and life was a lot more difficult. And we were able to eke out a living because of a fairly stable climate. We knew where we could plant crops and make them grow and feed ourselves, where to find animals to hunt and feed ourselves. I mean, the whole thing is a system, and we're part of it. And I think sometimes people lose sight of that as the climate changes and continues to change here. We aren't removed from this situation at all. We're right in the middle of it.
BJ, I have to ask, though, like, what's your favorite quirky attribute of a polar bear? I mean, what do you love about them so much?
Man, God, that's a good question. I think, I think one of the neatest things is really like how much they remind me of dogs. The things that they do truly do remind me of this Labrador that I had when I was in college, and the different stretching and the way that they kind of love to play a bit, and the way they kind of move, the way they swim. They're so dog-like that I think that's really pretty neat. That's probably one of my favorite things about being able to watch polar bears. What about you, Charlie? What's your favorite thing about polar bears?
I think you nailed it, and it's the same reason why I like brown bears. Is they just look like big dogs to me. I mean, they're so cute and cuddly. That nose, their personalities. You just want to play with them. I mean, there's something in the mythology of bears. I mean, think about from teddy bears, three bears, Goldilocks and the bears. I mean, the goon bear. There's something about the symbol of the bear that just symbols so much love. And when you see it, I don't know, I just kind of melt. Those paws. I mean, look at those paws right there and that nose. I just want to wrestle right now. Get in on it. Give a little noogie. ears, give him a big kiss. I mean, personally, I'd still do my thing and just airdrop a few seals and say, chill out. Another pun for the bear. Anyone who's having a stressful day, chill out, be a polar bear. Oh, I just thought of another joke. I won't go there. So with somebody, anyway. So, but look, they're just so, yeah, there's something about them. They bring out a child in me. I just have this mad kind of love and crush. I can't explain it. It's really interesting covering the brown bears and the polar bears because it's such a harder topic, the polar bear, because in Alaska with the brown bears, nature's actually working. And when you look at the polar bear, it's like such a heroic story because it's such a harder survival climate for them. So I'm more in awe. I mean, speaking of a difference that I think a lot of people ask me and get confused, polar bears do not hibernate. Is that correct? I mean, what do they do year round? I know mom's den, but can you distinguish the two?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And one of the reasons that bears around the world hibernate is because of a shortage of food. So for the bears, here I live not too far from Yellowstone. We get a good blanket of snow, things get pretty cold, and all the bugs and grubs and all the things that the bears eat here, they go into the ground and wait out the winter. So bears do the same thing. They get nice and fat here, and they go into the den and they sleep through the winter, conserving energy. Polar bears, if they were to go into a den for the winter, they would miss some of the best seals out there. Of course, this is when the ice is frozen that we've talked about. This is when they can really go out there. So polar bears don't den for a food scarcity scenario, and when they're on land, the males don't den. They just kind of wander around and wait for the sea ice to freeze. Bears that are in the further north, they don't even polar bears that are in the further north don't even come on land. They may spend their whole life on the sea ice. Now, you asked about females. That's a really good question too. Females do go into the den, and that's to have their cubs. It's not because they're going to try to save energy and sleep through the winter. It's because these cubs are born at 1 pound. If you can imagine, it's like a few sticks of butter, a box of butter. That's how small a polar bear is. And they don't have any fur when they're born. This means that they wouldn't be able to survive in the Arctic. It's too harsh. So mom keeps them in the den where it's safe and warm and nurses them up to about 20 pounds when they'd be big enough to, start following her around and start looking for food. So you can kind of think of a polar bear den as almost like an extension of the womb where the polar bears are allowed to grow in a safe space. So yeah, great question about denning.
Is it I set up some real quick true or false questions for you. Maybe you can elaborate. I love
Rapid
finding
fire.
trivia. I wanted it for our fans to kind of segue a little bit off climate change today because I know people are stressed and just learn about how wonderful polar bears are because, in my opinion, you take care of what you love. And the more you fall in love with these animals, the more you're going to want to be a better steward, which is just do little things to improve your environment. But I was just so in case people don't know, simple trivia. True or false? Polar bears aren't actually white; they're black. And can you explain that?
Yeah, so polar bears have blacks. Yeah, that's true. So polar bears, if you were to peel back their skin, and sometimes you can kind of see it if they're rolling around, and you can kind of see between their fur. This shot's a little hard, but if you were to peel back their fur there and really get down to the skin layer, their skin is black, and their hair is technically more clear than white. It's hollow, so it's insulative, and once you kind of pile up all that hair and then shine it in the sunlight, they could look anything from kind of a white color to I've got a piece of polar bear hide here. They can almost look yellowy. So they kind of range in colors like that. So I would say they actually really aren't white. They're more of a kind of a limestoney yellow off-white color with black skin underneath.
Wow. And then, true or false? Polar bears are classified as marine animals.
Yes,
They're
they
not.
are a marine mammal. And that's kind of funny because they don't have fins, they don't have whatever. They spend their whole life, if they were lucky enough, on the top of the ocean, on the frozen part, not down in it. But yes, we call them marine mammals. They live off of marine mammals. They live off of seals. Yeah, so true.
So then, which is at least true or false, but they're also classified as one of the largest land carnivores.
Yeah, that you hear that a lot for sure, and they are carnivores. I guess kind of technically they're on the sea ice, but because they're walking around on four legs, maybe they are kind of a land carnivore, and they are the biggest of the bears. Now, those bears in the Katmai cams, they can get pretty big. 747 was a huge bear. But if you were to take the largest of the grizzly bears, uh, Alaskan brown bears, and the largest of the polar bears are going to beat them by just a small amount.
So but it is a fascinating piece of trivia that they're classified as a marine mammal that are also the largest land carnivore. I mean, just in case that, in favor of Alex Trebek, so here's one, kind of like just when I was looking at these facts, I mean, that's kind of interesting, that they're a marine mammal that are the largest land carnivore.
Yeah,
Here's another one.
They're. Oh, go ahead.
No, keep going. It's fine.
I was just going to say that I think it just kind of speaks to how remarkable they are. They've figured out how to break all the rules and become huge animals.
And I also read, and I don't true or false, that a polar bear, because food can be so scarce when they get off the sea ice, they have the ability to fast up to 4 to 8 months if need be.
It's true. Yeah, you could almost think of a polar bear as like maybe the battery in your cell phone or something like that, where you plug it in overnight to charge it, and then it lasts through the day. Hopefully, the polar bears are kind of almost the same thing. They go out on the sea ice and they recharge their batteries by eating as many seals as they can, and almost like you saw 747 there. They can get huge. They can get super super big by eating all these fat-rich seals, and then when the sea ice melts, or or if they come to a time where it's harder to get seals, they can use all that body fat and coast through the summer months until they find their next meal. And so for bears wandering around the Arctic, that's perfect. You don't know when you're going to be able to get your next meal. You can't just pop by the grocery store and get a sandwich. You got to find your next meal. So it's nice to be able to coast for months, weeks to months. For females, this is super important. Those are the bears that could go as long as 8 months, because you have to be able to find a den, build it, hang out in there, give birth to your young, raise them to that 20 pounds, and then get out of your den and go find the next seal. And that could take up to 8 months to do that whole process. So totally remarkable animals.
Just
hear another remarkable animal.
My little polar bear. Another extraordinary fact. That's just another extraordinary fact about polar bears, though, to be the largest land carnivore that's considered a marine mammal at that size, that can also slow their metabolism down and live off their fat from 4 to 8 months. I mean, we were just comparing a polar bear to a dog, and we know that's one area where there's a big difference. This dog would go nuts. It's not fed. In 4 to 8 months, in those conditions, is really another remarkable feat that I just want people to admire and appreciate. I mean, these are such extraordinary mammals. Back to Polar Bears International. How can people help you get involved? I mean, can you tell us about some of your biggest challenges and ways for people to connect so they can help with the polar bears and your cause?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is the watchers, the viewers right now are doing it. Stay tuned, kind of get involved, learn as much as you can, so you can talk about these animals. I think the Explore cams are a perfect way as well, to kind of get in tune with what's going on with these places. We're doing these programs now. I know a lot of your other sites also put in touch the experts. You're doing live chats with all these other places. So I think the explore.org is a great place to learn about the world around us, so that you can, help protect it. You can learn about what needs to be protected. and you can talk about to your friends and neighbors about what's going on, to hopefully gain some excitement about conservation and helping out. So if you are maybe charged with at-home learning, the Polar Bears International website has a great education center too. Check that out. We've got lots of lesson plans on there for kids that may be doing some learning from home. So check that out. That's another great place to learn. Yeah, just kind of stay tuned to the PBI website. We got lots of great resources on there.
I could talk for you forever. I know that I probably have gone over time. I have to share one little fairy tale Sesame Street idea I have for polar bears. When I went up there, and again, I talked to the researchers, they're very complicated. Global warming is such a complicated problem. Sometimes it almost overwhelms us. And I try to make things again Sesame Street like. And to me, the polar bear story is very simple. And basically, what you have is when I look at the sea ice in the Arctic, you have these incredible species. And all they're trying to do every year is go home so they can eat. Their migration to Churchill is simply so they can get on the ice and eat. And what I thought would be fun, and I don't know how you do it, but it's almost like Groundhog Day. I just feel like every year we should celebrate the day the ice freezes. And if you made it that emotional, my hope would be that you would tell people would say oh, granddad, mom, dad, guess what? The ice froze today. My friend, the bear, can go home and eat. And each year where it took longer, you would, want to do things differently because you realized you wanted the bear to go home and eat. But then you think about that over 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and you actually have empirical data of days the ice froze. And I always thought it could be treated like a Groundhog Day where people celebrate because they want their beloved family member, the polar bear, to just get on that ice. So he wants to go hungry and go home and eat. And it's always something I always thought would be like a good fairy tale or animated story about these bears. And really, because that's really what they're doing. They're all coming, and when we all see them right now, and they're conserving energy and they're lounging around, they're simply waiting for the day that as they test that sea ice, it feels stable enough for them to begin their journey so they can eat. I mean, I think I'm correct there, but it's always been a fantasy of mine ever since that time I've been to Churchill.
I think it's a great idea, Charlie. I think we should start a campaign for what would you call it? Freeze up day. It's what would you call it? But I think it's a great idea. To kind of generate a bit of excitement around, just like you say, the day the bears get to go home.
I always thought you could put. Again, someone who's trained as a filmmaker, fantasy and reality, but like a stop motion camera right on the bay and just have it take photos every day. And, hopefully one day, again, I don't see ice freeze all the time, but the ice would freeze. And hopefully you'd get that shot of the polar bear walking out. The mist would cover him. The polar bear looks back, winks, thank you for your help, goes out on its journey, and happy ever after. I mean, that's what I love about Catline. I really want a happy story for the polar bears. Every year it's a tough one for me because I know they're facing such challenges. And, that's why it's an honor, BJ, to go back to you to work with Polar Bears International and all your selfless work. I mean, you guys are really on the front line trying to make a difference, make this world a better place, combat climate change.
Well, we really appreciate working. Sorry, there's a delay there, but we really appreciate working with you and all of your team at explore.org. The reach, the amount of people we're able to get in touch with through your platform and with these cams is absolutely amazing. And I do think that, this makes a difference to get people excited about how amazing this planet is truly key to solving this problem. And explore.org is a huge piece of that. Just get people to fall in love with the world again.
We always say at Explore, that was never stop learning. And I always say the evil mission of Explore. In fact, I was interviewed up at church when I was there, and they said, well, what's your mission? I said, I have an evil plan. And my evil plan is simply to get people to fall in love with the world because we take care of what we love. And that's what we're doing. And it's been a great honor. And And like I said, to anyone who tuned in, I'm always so grateful. We do everything, for people just simply to learn, to grow, to take it as far, and to showcase work like you, BJ. I mean, like I said, you were the first original live cam. You've been around since day one, so it's an honor to kind of go full circle, Arctic circle here, and come back to you. And so thank you so much. I don't know if you have any questions for me. But if not, I'm sure people have
I
better
think
things to
a
do.
big one, to kind of wrap things up is, how many cams do you guys have now, Charlie? If we were the first, how many do you have, and do you have a favorite besides the polar bear cam?
Uh, you know, I don't know. I've lost count of how many cams we have, but it's a nice amount. The cameras are like an extended family for me. I really get so much joy. I mean, I'm always shocked that every morning or day I look, and without leaving my home, this is pre even COVID, I can see the polar bears, maybe an elephant in Africa, sunset over Santa Monica, bird nesting, dogs that will be raised to be service dogs, a cat being rescued, a shark underwater. We've traveled the whole world. And the fact that we're connected to great minds like yourself where we can learn and take it is such an honor. And so, I because I'm a big dog lover, my favorite cams would probably be the bear cams because of that. But it's just a real treat. I'm really blessed to be able to help and to be able to be put in a position. And ultimately, like I said, we're here to showcase when Explore started, which was more film based. The mission of Explore was to champion the selfless acts of others and to inspire lifelong learning. And it's still the same, except now we use a lot of the live cams. It's simply to connect people and then to showcase work like yourself, BJ, and Polar Bears International. And to anyone else who tunes in, I mean, I use it as an antidote to stress. It really soothes my soul and brings me great joy and happiness. I mean, to be selfish, and some people use it educationally, and we're a community, and we're just here. We try to keep it pure, and it's just a great honor. Like I said, great fun. This is an experiment having me talk again. I don't know. The people will probably at the end of this one be like, no more. But it's been good times,
Oh,
BJ, and I look seeing in the future.
Yeah,
Thank you so
absolutely.
much.
Well, we appreciate everything, and let's do it again, and let's get our campaign for Freeze Up Day.
Okay, I had to get that in. It's been on my mind for years. Well, thank you so much. Have a great day, and anytime you guys need me, I'm here. Never stop learning. Thank
Thanks.
you.